to get out of Ephesus. And Paul is writing to him to help him to understand how to organize the church by dealing with the issues in Ephesus. He's almost giving him practical application as to how to, put things in order. This is how you handle worship. This is how you handle those within worship. How people ought to be in prayer, lifting hands, how people ought to engage. The men ought to find themselves being leaders. The women need to be silent, submissive. They don't need to dress inappropriately in the Lord's church as they come together. There are some things he has tried to lay out regarding how people ought to be in the Lord's house, none of which is addressing the person who is the person in peril and whose mind is out of there, whose actions or an attitude is, let's get away from here. Far away from here, far away from here. He's trying his best to get far away from here. That's where his mind is. But Paul is addressing him by giving him application, practicums, as well as organizational directives as to how to put the church there in Ephesus in order and how to help them to be okay. And so now Paul is talking about people who are operating in the office of a bishop. The word in our context for the New National Version is overseer, but is also referencing a bishop, a person who basically does that kind of work, a person who's above the pastor. And here as Paul talks to them about being a bishop, he's clear to say descriptively what he recommends how a person ought to be. They ought to be temperate, self-controlled. They ought to be the husband of one wife. They ought to find themselves not being a lover of money, not caught up with drunkenness. These things are practicum. So these things are things that are practical. These are clear behavioral things that ought to be in place that says you are worthy of this office. And so since he's walking it down, he takes the time to say what he expected or his view of how a person who would be considered a bishop or what the mantle of a bishop or walk in the office of a bishop or how they ought to be, the overseer, the person who superintends. And I think it's good for us to hear it. I think it's outstanding for us to hear it. But again, the question ought to be, what does this have to deal with on a personal level for Timothy, who's trying to get the hell out of a place called Ephesus? He's being told by Paul, again, inside of the 3rd verse of the 1st chapter, of the 1st letter. He says, I need you to stay in Ephesus. Stay there. But Paul is trying to organize the church and to help Timothy in the organization and formation of the ministry there in Ephesus, even down to how you're going to deal with people who are bishops. And the bishop needs to make sure that they are at this level or this standard. And how I really long for that to be the clear description of how people ought to be who are in the service of the episcopacy. I'm thankful that I have grown up in an era and a time where I have seen 2 forms of bishops that I have had the chance to understand totally and really get. I grew up, but I've been open to see new models of what this is. But when I grew up with the Church of God in Christ model of a bishop, and a bishop who had churches under him while he pastored, a jurisdictional model. And I was a part of the Central Georgia jurisdiction of the Church of God in Christ. And during that time, Bishop John Dale Husband was the bishop. And so I grew up in that era where I had a chance to see that model, jurisdictional model, where he was able to have, at one time, Central Georgia under him had over almost 200 plus churches that were under the Central Georgia jurisdictional arm. I then had a chance to watch and see the African Methodist Episcopal Church model in Georgia. And the bishops I had a chance to, in my earlier development, was a Frederick Talbot, also a Henry H. Harold Irvin Bearden, as well as a John Hurst Adams. I had a close personal opportunity to watch and behold how these persons interacted, and I saw them superintending. The model I most loved was the jurisdictional model. This is me confessing, and my confession of the model, primarily because I valued how I saw Bishop Husband being able to superintend his church, and at the same time be in a place where he could inspire and to lift other pastors, and to be in a position where he helped to promote, ordain, and put people in ministry and set people apart for the work of ministry. And I thought that that was outstanding. The Methodist system, while I do not discount it, I struggle with it because I think that it has pulled a lot of times persons away from the day-to-day work and have put extra work on the top level of the institution. When if the person who was the bishop also was the pastor, who superintended the church and also was able to have a work to serve, but was able to grow the work through their church that they served and allow the church to expand, I think that would also be a benefit and a blessing. While I don't discount the model and the system of which I'm in, I do treasure and respect that model more so. The whole mindset of seeing people call themselves bishops or set aside for the office of bishop for a local church, that I'm still grasping. I don't put it down. I don't discount it. I accept it, but I'm still grasping. Because the overseer to me is a person who is superintending and giving direction to multifaceted numbers of ministries and churches, and not just a church, and that you are impacting them in a manner that helps them to grow and to develop, and you call them together. And there is an opportunity for you to call the churches together, not just the church, not just a church. And so when I start hearing the conversation of this person is a bishop or that person is a bishop, somewhere along the line that ideology has gotten really messed up based upon everybody's need to be over against having a chance to serve. I love being the senior pastor of St. Mark, African Methodist Episcopal Church in Orlando. And while I myself can say that I believe that I have the mantle of a bishop, I recognize that that mantle is an operation of service rather than title, where then I'm able to work to develop the East Side model. And hopefully and prayerfully we can expand the territory of the church to another place of which we're able to help to superintend and give leadership for, but trying to therefore seek or out a quote-unquote office does not matter. The office should be something that is set aside for persons with multiple charges of ministries out of which they handle. Again, the one in which I think and I value and love the most is the jurisdictional model that I had a chance to be exposed to early in life through the Kojic Church. The one also I respect is the one I'm in, which is the African Methodist Episcopal Church's model, where there's a bishop set aside outside of a church who superintends the work. But I value and respect more that which is, I love more the jurisdictional model. I think that that is really one of the greatest models that could ever be done. I think that the bishop ought to still be in the church, superintending the church, serving the congregation, and having a chance to be able to speak out from that pulpit and to grow other churches from that church. and help the Lord's work to continue to blossom and grow. Well, I've addressed the issue that what Paul does here inside of the work here to Timothy, and I still say Timothy is trying to get out of Ephesus, but Paul is spending more time trying to address these quote-unquote issues on how to get the church organized that he has not really addressed Timothy just yet. But I'm out of time. It's Friday. I will see you tomorrow, Saturday. Know I love you. Till then, God bless. Take care. Bye-bye.